Our mission at SD Bullion is clear. The lowest cost gold and silver available online. While we do not have pretty blue boxes, free shipping, 4% credit card fees, or glamorous gold and silver infomercials, SD Bullion has the lowest prices that may save you hundreds on your next order. So before you make your next investment, do the math and join the over 15,000 new customers who have recently made the switch to SD Bullion. Why pay more?
We are starting to see the collapse of the civilization that we've become accustomed to over the past century, the old world order, if you will, and we're starting to see the ushering in of a new one. And that process cannot really take place unless and until we see the collapse of the current system. And I think that the collapse of the US dollar as the global reserve currency is going to be an inevitable part of that move towards the global financial and ultimately the governmental empire that we're seeing coming into view.
So how can the middle class see this affecting them?
Well, I think that this process is going to take some time to play out. I'm not seeing this happening in the next year or two, short of some sort of cataclysmic event and some sort of World War III scenario, which is a possibility. But short of something like that, I don't see that happening in the blink of an eye. But it is a process that will play out certainly in the course of the next decade, and certainly over the next 2 decades, as we see basically the status of the United States economy starting to be eroded, and its ability to maintain its financial empire continuing to be eroded by its overextension geopolitically and militarily. Now, how this ultimately plays out for the average person, for example, the average worker in the United States who's basically just trying to save for their retirement, I think that ultimately what we're going to start seeing is all of the various pieces of the financial order that have been in place in this age of the American empire are going to start failing one by one. We're going to start seeing, for example, the collapse of banking institutions that were previously thought to be sound. We're going to start seeing the ultimate failure of social services to provide the social services that have been promised. We're going to start seeing the failure of the pension system, ultimately cutbacks on the pension system. We're going to start seeing confiscations of people's pensions in the name of paying for governmental debt, etc. And again, this is a process that I expect will take place piece by piece, so that it doesn't look necessarily like an overnight collapse, but it will have the overall effect of basically putting all of those lifelines and safeties and things that people have come to rely upon in the past century into question. And when it does so, and as it does so, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to fall through those cracks who weren't expecting this. So people who are, I would say, coming towards the middle to late part of their career and looking down that stretch towards that retirement through the 401ks, et cetera, that they've been paying into most of their lives are not, I think, going to be able to rely on those to be able to retire when and if that time comes. And we're going to start seeing that affecting people on fixed incomes most obviously. And as that process of collapse quickens, ultimately we will start seeing this affecting the job market even more so than it already has. And the types of papering over of the unemployment rates, the true unemployment rate that has taken place by the U.S. government and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, et cetera, will become completely untenable. I mean, they already use cooked numbers for the unemployment rate, et cetera. That will become very obvious, I think, at a certain point. And once that point has been reached, I think that will only further quicken the pace of this collapse, because once the credibility of the institutions, the U.S. government and the banking industry starts to be undermined, then that will only further the process by which people will start to really realize what's going on and start to withdraw their money from that system, which will further quicken the pace of collapse. So I see at a certain point this will start to happen in a way that will look like a sort of overnight collapse. But I think it's a process that we're already already living through the beginning stages of right now. And I think this is reflected in the reality of a lot of people out there who are starting to see this in terms of this jobless recovery that we've heard so much about over the past several years, that is not being reflected for a lot of people who are finding it very difficult to find and maintain real full-time employment.
You mentioned that people who are counting on their 401k to provide for them in retirement are pretty much out of luck. I mean, what do you say for people who are in that situation right now?
Well, again, I'm not a financial advisor, so I couldn't give specific advice. Obviously, people have to take into account their own position, but I think that relying on those types of fixed income retirement plans and bonds and 401ks and things of that sort is not going to be, at a certain point, is not going to be tenable. It's basically going to be impossible to continue to eke out an existence on those things as the U.S. dollar collapse begins to take place and begins to quicken. And again, we already see the beginning stages of that collapse. That it doesn't look like a collapse at this current juncture because the U.S. dollar continues to do well compared to a lot of other currencies that are continuing to do poorly. But we are starting to see the global hegemony of the U.S. dollar starting to be eroded by Russia and China and other countries that are continuing to do more and more deals not in the U.S. dollar. So as we see the U.S. dollar collapse continuing, we will see it becoming more and more difficult for people who have all of their assets and all of their holdings denominated in U.S. dollars to afford the type of lifestyle that they've become accustomed to. Because of course, the part of the ramifications of the global economy that we've been engineered into over the past several decades is that now the United States produces very little of what it consumes, and as the dollar starts to lose its value, that will of course create a situation where people find it more and more difficult to actually purchase the things that they want. So I think people who have a lot of their assets and all holdings denominated in U.S. dollars and in things that are tied to the U.S. economic system are going to find it more and more difficult to make transactions, which is why I think it's important for people to start exploring different ways of holding the value of their money in assets and commodities that cannot be easily tampered with. And of course, I think the obvious one for a lot of people would be precious metals like gold and silver, which have more or less held their notional value compared to the fiat systems of many countries around the world for literally thousands of years now. But I think we can also, of course, leverage the technological capabilities that we have at our fingertips through cryptocurrencies and things of that nature as another alternative to the current financial system. And I don't think there's any one silver bullet that's going to be the answer, but I think that it's going to be a lot of different things that people can turn to that are not dependent on the U.S. banking system or upon the goodwill and nature of the U.S. government or the good standing of the U.S. Treasury to back up what they have in their in the fictional ones and zeros they have in their bank account.
It seems like the countries right now that are realizing the place to put your money is gold and silver are China and Russia. They've been accumulating a lot of gold. And if what you're saying is true, that the American empire is failing, I mean, the old saying with who has the gold has the power, where do you see the power ending up?
Well, I think China and Russia would definitely be part of the resistance bloc that has formed against the U.S. NATO bloc in this competition, I guess, for global hegemony. But I think that we have to be very careful about the way that we really picture the what's happening here, because I think it could be seen from a very naive point of view that, for example, the corporate and banking interests that are puppeteering the system are necessarily beholden to any one particular nation state, that, for example, they hold some sort of allegiance to the United States, where I don't think that's the case. So I think that the process of the buildup of the Chinese economy, for example, is something that has been absolutely 100% backed and engineered by a lot of the same people who are now profiting from the collapse of this system. And in fact, we can see for example, how a lot of the business interests that stepped in decades ago, back when the doors of the Chinese economy were first being opened, are now, of course, profiting from that early access that they had, with perhaps one of the most notable examples being the fact that David Rockefeller was in China meeting with Chairman Mao before Nixon and before Kissinger, and Kissinger, of course, just being a puppet of Rockefeller. So I think that is a pretty good snapshot of what's happened, and in fact has been perfectly not only known but predicted for a very long time. In fact, you had researchers like Anthony Sutton talking decades ago about how China was going to become the world's next big center of economic power. So definitely China and Russia are being positioned and have been positioned to be I guess part of that resistance bloc that does form some sort of viable alternative to the U.S. NATO hegemonic interests. But I think in the very long run, it's going to be the global power players who have existed now for decades in their current form and centuries in one form or another are going to be the ones that ultimately emerge from all of this. So looking at some of the global power players, the Goldman Sachses and the Royal Dutch Shells and those types of business and banking interests are probably going to emerge from this overall in a better position. But you're exactly right that Russia and China, for example, right now are positioning themselves as if they know that a collapse in the U.S. dollar is going to happen. And Russia has been buying gold at a furious pace in recent years, and China at an even more furious pace. And of course, we've just had China update their official gold holdings to show that they are now I can't remember the exact figures off the top of my head, but now they've definitely moved up in terms of the global gold central bank gold holdings charts, and are now importing something like 1,100 tons of gold per year. Chinese companies also being now the holders of most of the mining operations in the world right now. China is definitely positioning itself as if it knows that gold is going to be the gold standard, if you will, for the monetary paradigm that's coming next. And so I think that this process, again, is perfectly predictable and is being predicted by a lot of different countries. One of the only places in the world where this is still being poo-pooed, of course, is in the United States, where a lot of people are watching the talking heads on the economic indicators, the MSNBCs and the CNBCs of the world, are still saying that gold is a bearish holding right now, and people should be getting out of it, etc. And of course, this is all part of the smoke and mirrors that is happening right now in the effort to basically clear people out of that position, even as China and India and other places around the world continue their feverish demand for gold. People in the United States are being told that it's in their best interest to be holding, S&P companies and U.S. bonds, and I think that's going to be a pretty fatal position at a certain point when the real plug is pulled on this economic system.
So you mentioned that basically currently the banks are running the show, and in the future it seems like the banks will just continue to run the show even more. I mean, is there any way that people can speak out against this right now?
Well, you've just hit on the very important part of this, which is something that a lot of people have a hard time understanding, which is how can the banks profit from a situation in which their monetary base is being eroded? So, for example, how could a Bank of America or Goldman Sachs or one of the big six in the United States, how could those banking institutions profit if the U.S. economy goes into depression or something of that sort? And that's something that for you and I kind of makes sense, because obviously if there's some sort of economic depression, you and I and most of the people listening to this conversation will suffer directly from that. But I think it's important to understand that in times of global economic collapse, wealth is not destroyed. It's only transferred. And we saw that, for example, in the Great Depression in the 1930s, where the people who were pre-positioned for that collapse ended up profiting immensely from the collapse, not in absolute numbers, in terms of the numbers of dollars in their holdings, but in terms of the relative wealth that they are holding in respect to the rest of the economy. And I think that's the thing that we have to understand with this. And then on top of the regular commercial banking layer is, of course, the central banking layer, which are the monetary authorities of all of the countries which themselves collude together in the Bank of International Settlements based in Basel, Switzerland. And I think from the perspective of the central banks, it's also important to realize that the erosion of monetary base, for example, the erosion of the purchasing power of the euro, can be a good thing insofar as crisis helps to justify further intrusion in the economy. And just as a further example of that, we saw recently the European Central Bank taking even further steps to further unite the central banks of Europe into a central banking union that has even stronger powers now on the basis of this. And we saw just last week, in fact, the European Central Bank announce the fact that it had completed a new banking union agreement in the name of course, bailing out failing or faltering financial institutions in Europe. So on the basis of this collapse, we can see the banks trying to get more and more power and accruing that for themselves. Now, this is important to understand because it presents to us both the very great peril that we're in right now as a civilization that is being held collectively hostage by the banking authorities, but also it presents to us the potential solution to this, which is really that we have to start withdrawing ourselves from the economy that has been structured around us through these central banking authorities with their issuing of this funny money paper in the United States context, obviously the Federal Reserve notes that are issued by the Federal Reserve through the U.S. Treasury. I think we have to understand that our participation in that structure, in that institution, is part of the problem and helps to enable these banks to maintain their hold over us, so that when and if the collapse actually does occur in the US dollar, then people will be scrambling once again, looking to the government and looking to the central banking authorities to come in and save the day. Whereas if we can find a way to create alternative systems that bypass completely those Federal Reserve notes and the banking structures and institutions that have been placed around us, if we can start to do that now, while we still have some modicum of financial independence, quote unquote, then we can start to build the alternative structures which we can then turn to in the case of that collapse. And there are lots of different ways to do this. But some of them that I would suggest would be, for example, looking into complementary currencies. As I mentioned earlier, of course, there are the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, which are now stealing a lot of headlines for some of the less savory aspects of their existence and some things that are not great about them. But as one potential possible complement to what we are using right now, I think it is, at any rate, it does present a way around the banking structure as it exists right now. And then there are many, 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 many other local currencies that exist right now, and often in people's backyards without them even knowing about it. And I could point to the existence of things like Ithaca hours or Colorado mountain hours or Calgary dollars. I'm from Calgary, Canada. Basically, in every major city right now, there's some sort of alternative or complementary currency that can be turned to. And often these types of complementary currencies seem laughable to people who are looking at them from the perspective of the almighty dollar. But that's only because people have not really invested in building these community currencies into anything more than what they are at the moment. And I think, again, that's to our detriment. The more that we can rely on creating alternatives and creating forums for people to be trading with each other directly, trading with their neighbors, trading with people in their local economies, the more we can get around these overarching banking structures that have been placed around us. And I think we have to have a realistic view of what an economy that doesn't rely on these banking monoliths would look like. And I think we have to be working towards that. And it can be maddeningly slow in terms of progress in the creation of alternatives. But I think those baby steps, again, are absolutely vital, especially now as we can see this collapse coming into view, and we know it's coming. It's only a matter of when, not if.
Mentioning Bitcoin, isn't there a possibility that the government could just control that? I mean, recently, wasn't it true that the IRS is now saying that Bitcoin is a property, so now they're going to have property tax on it? I mean, what about the government controlling that currency as well?
Well, that's absolutely right. The IRS just came out with a ruling that Bitcoin is a commodity and thus is subjected to all of the taxes that would befall any other commodity. And I think that is absolutely right. That of course, if and when and as Bitcoin actually does, or any of those types of cryptocurrencies does become any sort of viable threat to the U.S. dollar hegemony, of course the governments of the United States and other countries will step in to try to limit that effect. And now rumors of Chinese crackdown on banks trading or allowing Bitcoin exchanges is starting to affect the Bitcoin markets, and we've seen a fall in the price of Bitcoin of $100 just in the past week on the basis of that IRS ruling and these Chinese rumors. So there is, of course, a lot of ways that the government can and will get its hooks into these types of systems, but I think that that affects those parts where the Bitcoin economy interacts with the dollar economy. So for people who are exchanging in and out of dollars for Bitcoin, this will affect them, and this will affect the way they transact. But Bitcoin as or other cryptocurrencies, and again, I don't think that these are perfect alternatives, but they're something. But insofar as they represent pseudonymous ways of participating in agoristic markets that go around the economy in ways that are not trackable or not necessarily trackable by the U.S. Governmental authorities, it does present a way for people to transact around the world instantaneously in ways that although the U.S. government might claim that they have control over, I don't think that they really do. Again, when you're changing your cryptocurrency in or out of the currency of any given country, obviously that country is going to have all sorts of ways that it can get its stakes in that claim. But if this is being done all through the cryptocurrency, and as that economy starts to grow, the cryptocurrency economy starts to grow, more transactions will take place directly through that, which will not be easily, if at all, trackable or controllable by the centralized authorities. And I think that's one of the promises of this cryptocurrency that's taking place, this cryptocurrency revolution. Again, I don't think it's a perfect solution, and it's certainly not a solution for all people in all transactions, but it's at least one more arrow in that quiver that people can use to fire into the heart of the imperial beast that is currently trying to basically collapse the world system in a bid for global hegemony.
All right. Well, James Corbett, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it with that. Are there any last thoughts you'd like to leave with our viewers before we let you go?
Well, I think my last thought is that although this sounds like an exceptionally bleak message, it is ultimately the message is what we make of it, and my emphasis is always on what people can and should be doing right now to prepare for what we know is coming, so that when and if this collapse really does take place in the way that I'm suggesting it will, then the only people we'll have to blame for the consequences of that collapse will be ourselves for not adequately preparing for it. And again, there are lots of different ways to prepare for it. So for people who are looking for all sorts of different answers, not just economically, but economically and socially and geopolitically, etc., people who are looking for solutions on that, I suggest that they go to CorbettReport.com and just type the word solution into the search bar. I've done a lot of different podcast episodes and other audio and video media on the subject of solutions, whether it be complementary currencies or 3D printing or all sorts of different things on many different subjects. And I think that there are ways that we can combat this, and there are ways that we can unite against the problem that we know is happening right now in the name of these overarching banking structures that are certainly not acting in the best interests of humanity. And ultimately, it is a game for all the marbles, and it is one that we cannot afford to lose. So it's incumbent on all of us to take this information and do with it what we can. And it might seem like baby steps, but those baby steps are exceptionally important when we are talking about the future of humanity that's hanging in the balance right now.
Before we let you go, did you want to share with the viewers where they can find you on the internet?
Yes, if people are looking for my work, I'm associated with a lot of websites, including the International Forecaster and Boiling Frogs Post and Global Research TV and many other websites. But I think the one-stop shop that people can use to find all of my work is CorbettReport.com. And if they go there, they can find basically all of my previous work available for free download, and they can also find DVDs and subscription to my newsletter as a way to support what I do.
James Corbett from the Corbett Report, thank you so much for joining us today on financeandliberty.com.
Thank you for having me.
Click here to subscribe for free to financeandliberty.com and also our sponsor, reluctantpreppers.com, helping you be aware and prepared.